Focus on Aging Adults is sponsored in part by AARP.
Pennsylvania has one of the largest aging populations in the country. Our aging adults are vibrant, active contributors to our society. PCN, in partnership with AARP, present Focus on Aging Adults.
Welcome to Focus on Aging Adults. I'm Larry Casper. This program is brought to you in partnership between PCN and the AARP of Pennsylvania. Today we'll be talking about family caregiving. Our guests are Joanne Grossi, Executive Council President Emeritus at the AARP of Pennsylvania, Nathan Lampenfeld, Special Assistant to the State Secretary of Aging, and Jason Kavulich, Pennsylvania's Secretary of Aging. Welcome, everyone. Secretary, let's start with you. What are the basic responsibilities of family caregiving?
Well, I mean, that's a really broad question when you think about it. A caregiver could be someone in my situation where my father's an older gentleman that lives in the same community as I do, but my siblings don't live near us. And, just the, typical, hey, helping dad out with things like you help him cut the grass, or you help him with running errands, or you help him with any, number of things could be considered a caregiver role, or it could be something more complex where you're taking care of someone who's more care dependent. Where you're either a spouse or a child and you're taking care of someone and you have to use, more hands-on help. You're helping them take baths, you're helping them get dressed, you're helping them do some of the daily living skills that they struggle with. It could be something also like meal prepping and helping out in that way. So it could be so many different things to so many different people. But the reality is all of us at some point will fill a caregiver role in our lives. And making sure that we have resources and supports for caregivers in Pennsylvania is extremely important to the Shapiro administrations. It's one of the top things that we have done at the Department of Aging to prioritize is making sure that we're supporting individuals, whether they're grandparents raising grandchildren, you're a spouse caring for your loved one, or if you're a child taking care of your parents. We want to make sure that the resources and supports are there for you and that you know what's there for you.
How about you, Joanne? What comes to your mind when the subject turns to family caregiving?
Yeah, I think the Secretary said it really well. I was a caregiver for my father for 10 years, and it really ran the gamut. At first, he lived at home independently, but I took care of him every week. I cooked all his meals, I cleaned the house, I washed his clothes, so I took care of him at home. But then he, as he got more, he wasn't able to do that anymore. He came and lived with me. And so then I was really a full-time caregiver doing everything that the Secretary kind of alluded to, preparing all his meals, helping him get dressed in the morning, giving him his baths, making his doctor's appointments, taking him to appointments, doing the whole thing. It was almost a 24-hour-a-day job. And then finally, for the third stage, when I could no longer care for him at my home, I had to put him in assisted living. But even then, your caregiving responsibilities don't end, because I still had to make sure, I visited him every day. I made sure he had all the things he needed. I still had to buy a lot of things like his Insure and his Depends and all those kind of things, and make sure he was getting his medication. So I really got to see it through really kind of 3 stages of caregiving.
Well, Joanne, we look forward to talking to you more about your personal experience for caregiving. For now, let's include Nathan in the conversation. What kind of personal experience do you have with family caregiving, Nathan?
Yes, I have quite a bit of experience. My mother was the primary caregiver for both of her parents, sort of dealing with different things at different times, which is sort of what I always emphasize about caregiving, is that it's completely different at each sort of scenario you go through. So with her father, she was much more of a hands-on, bathing, supporting, taking care of his wounds, things like that. And then with her mother, it was much more of this emotional, behavioral support where, she was dealing with early onset dementia. And so she had to sort of do this completely different measure of being a caregiver, where it was about making sure she was socialized, happy, not feeling like she was closed in and isolated. So it was a different experience.
Let's expand on that, Mr. Secretary. As far as emotional support is concerned, obviously there are challenges here for example, between a son and a daughter, or their father and mother, because the relationship changes the more they need help, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And that's why you can see with many of our services through our 52 area agencies on aging, one of the things that we do highlight is our caregiver support program and having support groups for those caregiver support programs. Those support groups bring caregivers who are working with their family and taking care of their family together, so they can have some conversation about the common struggles. They can have conversation about the common frustration and understanding, that they need a break sometimes, and how, it's so challenging in many ways to get the respite that they need. So, connecting caregivers with other caregivers is very helpful to know that you're not alone. There's thousands upon thousands of other people in this state living the same way you are, taking care of a loved one, feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed. But there are people, there are resources, there are people to talk to and support you through this time in your life and this time in your loved one's life. And you should rely on the services that are out there to really help you, because that's what they're there for, really to help you, support you, and work with you and meet you where you're at.
So now that you put it that way, Mr. Secretary, let's talk more about the area agencies on aging and how important they are, how common they are, and how they're distributed around the state.
So there's 52 area agencies on aging that cover all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. All of them have a caregiver support program that has become more and more popular each and every year. The caregiver support program is both federally and funded through our Pennsylvania lottery system. We're always grateful for the lottery resources that we receive to support our work. And it's a reimbursement program where individuals, who expense, certain things for their loved one, whether it be some in-home assistance, whether it be respite care, whether it be Depends or other items that they need, can submit those receipts to a certain amount based on their approval of their care plan and be reimbursed by the Area Agency on Aging through this program for those expenses. It really goes a long way in supporting people in the community. It helps people stay in their homes. It gives them the supports and services that they need and deserve. And it also really gives the caregivers a break. You think about a caregiver getting Meals on Wheels for their loved one. Oh, okay, well, what does that really mean? Well, that's a break. That's one less meal that caregiver has to give or do or prepare. It's a little bit of a break. When we don't think about it, it's a big deal. But when you're neck deep, and you can talk more about that than anyone, when you're really in the process of caregiving, that one meal just might be what you need that day to give you that little bit of sanity, that little bit of break. So we work with our area agencies on aging. We work with our partners like AARP and other community partners to really make sure that we're supporting our caregivers with the resources, we're supporting them with support groups in any way we possibly can.
And if you don't mind if I add on something, our AARP data shows that the average caregiver spends $7,200 out of pocket every year, being a caregiver. So getting some reimbursements, that really is a financial lifeline too, because not only as a caregiver do you a lot of times suffer financially if you had to leave the workforce early, which is something I had to do, but then on top of it, you're having to pay out of pocket for expenses like Depends, like Insure, things you don't think about. So that program really, helps people.
And you brought up another very good point, and that point is that some people who are still working, and caregiving, are working basically a part-time job on top of their job. So 18 to 24 hours a week in caregiving, in addition to their 40 hours a week or more that they're spending at their full-time job.
So had you elected to stay in the workforce, Joanne, were there programs that you possibly could have taken advantage of?
Oh, yeah, there were, but, for me, the right choice was to retire early. My dad was at a point where he just couldn't live independently anymore, and so the best thing to do for me, kind of morally and emotionally, was to have him come live with me. But that meant, because as the Secretary said, it just takes up too much of your time. I couldn't work anymore full-time, and so I had to retire early. But that was the choice for me, but I know there were other services available if I had
So you brought your dad into your home?
Yes. I brought my dad.
Who else was in the house? What was the family situation?
No, I live alone.
Okay.
So it was me and taking care of him, 24/7. So it was me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, were any physical or cognitive challenges part of your dad's situation?
Oh, yeah, completely. One of the reasons he came to live with me is because I live in a one-floor home. He couldn't manage stairs anymore. That's why he had to move out of his house, because he had a 3-story house.
How old a man was your dad?
When he moved in with me, he was 88. Yeah. So he couldn't manage stairs anymore. He had to use a walker. I also had a shower that was a level shower. He could just walk right into the shower, didn't have to step over a tub or anything like that. So I actually
Even
already
if
had
it's a few inch step over, that can be a serious challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, my house was already kind of set up for somebody to come live with me. But yeah, he had all of those issues. He was starting to get dementia, incredibly hard of hearing, even with hearing aids, incontinent. So yeah, actually a lot of challenges.
I see, yeah, even the obstacle of being hard of hearing, it just occurs to me, boy, that must have really complicated it for you.
It complicated things.
How did you communicate? I mean, did you have to raise your voice?
Yes. I mean, I used to say if somebody was walking by, they'd think I
hear
was
you
like
out on the
elder
street.
abuse or something. Yeah, they would hear me out on the street because even with hearing aids, I had to speak very loudly and I had to repeat things every single time. I couldn't say anything to him once and he heard it. I had to repeat everything every single time.
Well, Nathan, let me ask you, how well do you think society is adapting to the increasing needs for the kind of caregiving we're talking about today?
I think as caregiving is becoming more common, as we have more older adults that are living longer, more diverse lives and more caregivers to support that population, people are becoming more aware of the type of situation that caregiving is. They may not always call themselves caregivers, but they know that they need help. They're providing for their parents or other loved ones. And they're realizing, there's a lot of people in my position too that also need help, or if not need more help. They might not have that traditional family support system, more like a solo caregiver. They may be providing care from afar, more of a long distance caregiver. Or we have, there's more and more young adults, people in their 20s, teens or younger, that are providing care and really helping their parents as the caregivers as well. So we have these more emerging populations that I think are raising awareness of what caregiving is and the needs of caregivers.
Are there sometimes kids involved in caregiving? That could be the reality, but it's not an ideal situation, is it?
Yeah, well, it can be. Sometimes parents find it more supportive with these intergenerational sort of support systems. So for example, when my mother was a caregiver, we were helping her with her, errands and things like that, so she could be supervising our grandparents, and other times we would be the ones that were taking care. But oftentimes families can bond over this type of thing. Sometimes it can cause a lot more emotional and interpersonal stress as well. So again, every care situation is different. It all depends on the people and timing and situations.
Well, now that you mentioned interpersonal stress, Nathan, I mean, life does have different stages, obviously. So when is it time to start thinking about caregiving? Because plenty of our viewers out there are wondering right now, when should I start thinking about this and taking care of mom or dad?
Well, I'll chime in.
I knew it would go to you eventually, Joanne, but go ahead right now.
Well, it's funny because we actually, when my parents were in their 60s, which is what I am myself now, we actually started having those conversations. So it's interesting that, we were always kind of prepared as to what would happen. And we would even talk specifically about if mom died first, if dad died first,
How
what would
those
happen.
Conversations go? I'm very curious. I mean,
we were
constructive, stress-free?
Pretty stress-free. My parents are immigrants from Italy, and I think it's cultural in a way. That I was pretty accepting that you're going to age, you're going to die, and so we would have very kind of, rational, casual conversations about what was going to happen because we were very cognizant. We weren't in denial about people are going to get older, people are eventually going to die, and so we actually had started having those conversations when my parents were in their 60s about what would happen. And it's funny, now that I'm in my 60s, my siblings and I, we have conversations with, their children, or for me, my nieces, about what would we like as we get older. So my bottom line is I actually think it's important to have those conversations 50s, 60s when you're still cognizant, healthy, and really able to make some realistic plans.
What do you think, Mr. Secretary?
And
then we'll go to you, Nathan.
There's a couple of things, but I really wanted to just highlight one thing. As the three of us are sitting here in conversation, all of our examples are personal examples. So I could talk about my great-grandparents, how that I was a caregiver with we didn't think I was a caregiver, but I spent every day after school until my grandfather and grandmother came home from work. I sat with my great-grandfather because he couldn't be alone.
You were a caregiver before it had a name.
Right. But we can talk about my grandparents, we could talk about my mom, we could talk about a number of personal examples. Nathan has personal examples. You have obviously the biggest personal example here. But it all comes back to all of us, again, will have this role to play in our lives. Whether we call it caregiving or not, it's a part of all of us. And to a point that Nathan made earlier, the awareness of the caregiver, the awareness of what people are going through is becoming more prevalent. And that's what we're here for today, to talk talk about, you're not alone. This is all of us. Every single one of us will face this challenge. Every single one of us needs support. And you need to know that there's people will be there to help you and talk you through what you're going through, because it's going to impact all of our lives, whether we plan for it or not. I don't think people have those good conversations like you and your parents had. And I can say from my own, being one of 4 siblings, and having a dad who's 70, who's still relatively young and very healthy, we never talk about anything like that as a personal example. We never have had that conversation, even though I'm the Secretary of Aging. I have not initiated that conversation with my siblings.
That is somewhat ironic, but at the same time, I totally understand.
Yeah, so. And I don't think a lot of families are having these conversations, and therefore when they get to crisis, they come looking for service.
Right. And to that exact point, so I think there's the people that accept the conversation and pursue it full time, and then there's the avoiders, and then there's also the conflict situation where there's a fight over Thanksgiving about who's not doing enough care, or there's that type of thing too. And then I think to the Secretary's point as well, and Joanne's point as well, having that conversation as early as possible so that it's about how can we support you after retirement, and so you can enjoy your older adulthood rather than a crisis situation, rather than it being a conversation about death and end of life. So thinking about aging as something more broad than just this illness, ailment, and end of life situation.
And there's definitely some consolation in knowing that there are people out there that have gone through the exact same thing that you have. So why not join forces from them and find out what they learned?
Yeah.
No, that's right. And right now there's 60 million of us, right? So AARP again had some data that shows right now in this country there are 60 million caregivers. So that's a lot of people. So if you're a caregiver, you're not alone by far. That's a great amount of the population who are caregivers right now.
Well, Joanne, you brought some data to our show here, which I appreciate, so that makes me want to explore this report that was put together with the assistance of AARP, a report about caregiving done this year in 2025. So what were the questions that you wanted answers to in this report?
Well, I mean, things like, and I'll certainly let others chime in, but things like how many people are caregivers, what is it costing you? For example, one of the data points we also found out is it's costing $22 billion of unpaid care, so.
You said $7,200 out of pocket every year.
72, right, out of pocket every year, and that ends up being, but also from people like me who left the workforce and other things like that, but it equals to $22 billion of unpaid care every year. That's a tremendous amount of money. Think if we weren't caregivers and all these people had to go into the system, what that would be costing the healthcare system. If someone like my dad didn't live with me and instead went into a facility or a nursing home, think of what that would have cost the system. But again, because people like me provided unpaid care, we're saving the healthcare system from a great strain.
So what were some of the important findings from this report? What jumped out as especially interesting? You talked about the costs out of pocket, how many caregivers are out there. What else emerged?
I found the value of that unpaid care, so it's 32 billion, I believe, is the number of informal caregivers providing, that's the valued care, which has jumped up from 2023 because we're seeing more and more people providing care, more intense care, more sophisticated care in that informal setting. I always find that to be the most interesting. And again, I think helps us emphasize our point of trying to, build products and supports like the PA Care Kit that support this informal, unpaid caregiving population.
Oh, so now that you brought up the PA Caregiving Kit, just tell us, what exactly is that?
Sure. It is a collection of tools, information, and resources that we have on the pa.gov website, pa.gov/carekit, that's meant to support this unpaid informal caregiving workforce, in quotes. It has all sorts of tools and worksheets, resource guides and booklets, and then just information. And it's all meant to be this one-stop shop. We even have this quiz you can take to understand your needs and get a direction to how to navigate all that different information.
Otherwise, it sounds like it could be a lot of information.
Yes, it's vast, and that's by design because we have so many different caregivers providing different types of care that need all sorts of information to be able to feel empowered and confident and to be able to do their hard job.
And what about the Family Caregiver Support Program? Sounds very similar to the Care Kit. So tell me what the difference is.
Sure. So as the Secretary mentioned, the Caregiver Support Program is operated through our 52 area agencies on aging. It's much more focused on that financial reimbursement, also getting people connected to care management and to those caregiver support programs. But that's much more of a support program, whereas the toolkit is an early prevention intervention to get people connected to resources, to the aging network before these crisis, more intense caregiving situations.
So as far as reimbursement is concerned, I'm sure that's getting the attention of our viewers. Just what kind of things are they being reimbursed for? What kind of receipts are covered? Give me some examples.
Well, a good example is, I'll use my grandfather. My grandfather was a part of the Pennsylvania Caregiver Support Program. He was reimbursed a certain amount for the hours of care he brought in from my grandmother from a private provider. And so he was reimbursed for that expense. And the company came in, gave him a few hours a week, and he needed it as a respite and a break, and it was a huge relief to him. And he thought that it was one of the greatest services that he's ever received as an American. He thought he could never say enough good things about it. It was, it was before my time in aging, ironically. So, I mean, for me to tell that story, it's actually a little bit more special to me because he really appreciated the services we have in Pennsylvania, even before I was working in the aging space. But you can cover that. You can cover Depends. You can cover your nutrition supplements. There's a variety of things. If you're a grandparent raising grandchildren, you can cover respite supports like even a camp or clothes for the grandchildren that you're raising, sometimes unexpectedly with limited resources again. So it's a broad program. We cover as much as we possibly can. We work with the older adults to see, or the caregiver to make sure that we cover as much of the care recipient's expenses as that we can under the guidelines that we have to operate. But I think going back to the care kit too, one, how personalized our resources. When you reach out on our website, you look at it. Most people are reaching out in crisis. They're reaching out because there's an event happening in their life that they need support for. It's thanks to support from people like our partners at AARP and the Alzheimer's Association that Nathan, who has very humbly not mentioned that he turned this around in 9 months as part of Aging Our Way PA, as our first big push to get a tactic across the finish line. Him and his partners turned this around in 9 months, with intense stakeholder engagement to really make sure this was a product that served the person that was on the other end of the computer, to make sure that you can access it at a public library. You don't have to necessarily go to an area agency on aging. You can use it from your phone if you're sitting in a coffee shop. We want to make sure people can get it, that it's easy for them to use, it's responsive to their individual needs, and it gets them pointed in the direction for the help that can solve their problem at that moment, which is something different than other toolkits that are out there that really give people a list of resources, but it doesn't give you that individual approach. And I think that's one of the most important things to highlight about how we worked with everyone to make sure that this care kit was so responsive, and that if you did need to be part of the caregiver support program, or you should be referred to the caregiver support program, the care kit could help you find your area agency on aging and start that process.
Now, the Secretary has indicated how important it is to reach out to the area agencies on aging. And as far as you're concerned, Joanne, since you were caring for your dad for 10 years, in retrospect, are there some things, or rather, what programs did you take advantage of, since the Secretary pointed out the value of following personal examples here? What did you take advantage of from Pennsylvania government that really helped the chore of looking after your dad for 10 whole years?
Well, yeah, no, I have to be honest and say I didn't use any resources from the Pennsylvania
And I'm sure that's true to a lot of our viewers. They just don't know they're there.
Well, I actually did know they were there. I did actually have...
I'm trying to help you out, Joanne.
I know. I did meet with our area agency on aging to discuss some services for my dad. His income level, fortunately, was high enough that he didn't qualify for a lot of the services. So that's an important thing to know, that these are income-based. And so he actually was fortunate enough to have enough of an income that he didn't qualify for the services. But I certainly looked to things like, how do I get him to adult daycare, to give myself a break, and he wasn't willing to go to a senior center. We could have done that, but he didn't want to do it. So either there were things that he didn't qualify for or he didn't want to use.
So you were looking for opportunities for what they call respite care.
Yes.
But it sounds like your dad wouldn't go for it.
Yes, that's correct. I was looking for a break.
And I think I'm really glad that you said Adult Day too,
Yeah,
because it's a
right.
resource we've talked about here before, and it's a respite resource that is completely underutilized in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but somebody, he was still cognizant enough that he was able to make choices and he didn't want to go. So I didn't use some of the services because he either didn't qualify or he didn't want to use them. But I actually did reach out to the AAA in Montgomery County and talk to a caseworker to get some help.
And I love that point too. If we're still dealing with an older adult that has the right to make decisions for themselves. Thank you.
That's a good point,
Yes.
right?
Joanne, were there aspects of your dad's care that, again, in retrospect, maybe you'd been better off getting some kind of formal training for? What do you think?
Oh, yeah.
And you must have run the gamut. Again, you cared for him for 10 years.
Well, and the good news was at a certain point I did. We actually had an occupational therapist come into my home and then help me, design the home differently. Things like putting bars in the shower, getting rid of this rug, moving the furniture this way. It's amazing all the things you don't think about to make a home safer. So I did actually have an occupational therapist come in and then also a physical therapist come into the home. So and then I had a nurse come into the home too. So I really did get kind of enough training and help to, help me figure out how's the safest way to have my home set up. How do I take care of them the safest way? So I did go through that training.
Now, while you were caring for your dad, did you have any relationship with the AARP at that point? I'm just curious about the kind of
I was state
significant,
president.
useful. There you go.
I was state president for Pennsylvania. So again, that was actually really helpful for me because I knew, and I know we've been talking about the Care Kit and the AAAs, but AARP has a lot of resources too. In fact, our website is aarp.org/caregiving. Believe it or not, I used our own website a lot, because one of the things we haven't talked about yet is it's not just kind of some of the stuff we've already talked about, but there's medical issues, there's financial issues, there are legal issues, and you really have to get yourself up to speed on all of this. For example,
legal issue, give me an example.
Well, I became my father's health care power of attorney, and so you actually have to get an official document prepared, giving me that authority because he was hospitalized a couple of times. I had to make those kind of legal decisions for him. I had to make his health care decisions. For example, one time he was in the hospital and I refused an operation. I used to be Deputy Secretary of Health. I have a public health background, and so I felt like this operation wasn't in his best care, at least at this moment in time. So I got to refuse the operation. Those are the kind of things I was allowed to do legally because I had the health care power of attorney. So that's one of the documents.
That sounds like a lot
really
of responsibility.
Well, it is, but it is. And then there's the financial. My sister became his financial power of attorney.
Good.
Because
So she was in the picture.
So there was a point when he couldn't make financial decisions anymore. He couldn't manage his money. So these are all things like it's really important you think about. The Care Kit gives those advice. So does the AARP website. But these are things you really have to think about. And a lot of times, like Nathan was saying, you unfortunately start thinking about these when you're right in the middle of it instead of in advance. And that's too bad because you have to get, you're really figuring out when you're in crisis mode in a way.
Crisis mode, you got to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour fast.
And really to highlight what you said earlier about having those conversations early helps also when you have a large sibling group relieve some of the stress. And what we have seen down from a boots on the ground perspective is you see calls coming into area agencies on aging all the time about families that are fighting about decision-making power and financial decision-making power, and where should mom or dad be because conversations have not had or were not facilitated. And I love what you said. Like, you have to get involved. You have to start getting these conversations out there and having them, so that when it turns into the crisis that Nathan described, you are a little bit more prepared and a little ready for it, because it's going to come eventually.
I also think with the medical and legal things, those are very daunting, sort of big tasks, but people forget about the day-to-day logistics that can be so important, and that also you need assistance in doing the, things like, where are all the important documents and the passwords now that people are really using technology? How do I, prepare for a funeral and make sure that the obituary that I'm writing is what the person wants to be remembered for. So all of those things that you're trying to think of, but it's not so elevated as much as who's going to take care of the will and who's going to make the final medical decisions, things like that.
Which aspect of caregiving needs more financial support from state government? How about you, Secretary?
Well, I think really, because it's an individual need. So you can't just say one priority takes precedence over another.
There's no one silo versus another?
No, because it's really about you're the caregiver and you have a care recipient. What is your need? And we can't answer that for everybody. It has to, it has to be that individual's need, and what that, you might have been fortunate enough that you were able to provide the in-home care for your father. Someone might not be able to do that. But you would have benefited more for legal assistance to help you prepare all the paperwork that you needed, to be the power of attorney for health decisions and to have your sister set up to be. So that's difference right there is in every household as we walk, as we go through any neighborhood in Pennsylvania. Everybody will have a different need. So it's hard to say what the priority should be. The understanding that the need is out there, that there's 3.4 million older Pennsylvanians, that we're the 5th oldest state in the country, and that this challenge is in every single one of our communities is really what I think is the greatest message, and to highlight that there's needs, there's countless needs, that we need to be able to support this population as they age in communities, because you're right, we would overwhelm our system completely if the unpaid caregiver workforce went away and we had to look for formal paid services or facility services for individuals, unfortunately, all across Pennsylvania.
Can Medicare take care of any of the expenses as far as family caregiving is concerned?
Well, I think most of those expenses fall to the family, unfortunately, and you see limited support from Medicare in this space. Not nearly enough compared to what we in Pennsylvania.
Some support, but not much.
Yeah, what we do with our resources from the Pennsylvania Lottery.
I mean, for example, Medicare paid for my dad's physical therapy and the occupational therapist, and even with his, Advantage plan, he got some like $60 every quarter for insure. Depends. It was $60 every 3 months, but they were small. But I mean, things like the PT and the occupational therapist, that was helpful. But I agree with the secretary; it's certainly not as much as people need and we'd like to have.
And how about Medicaid then, as far as paying for any long-term care? And of course, everyone's talking about the recent cuts to Medicaid.
Well, I think Medicaid, you see we've crossed a different threshold because of the individual, their need, and their qualifications for Medicaid. So the home and community-based services that you receive from Medicaid are a lot different than what we from the Department of Aging offer, and it's different than the services we can support with AARP in the community. So you cross into a different realm when you're dealing with Medicaid because of the person's income, because of where that person is and in terms of what resources they have to work with. So basically they don't have any assets or resources, and that they really cross into that threshold that they have to rely totally on our Medicaid system for support, and possibly at some point maybe a nursing home placement.
So it's nice when a family has several members and they can delegate certain responsibilities. And Joanne, I see, well, you had your sister at least to some degree helping with the care of your dad, and it can be stressful, of course, to provide that kind of support. And everybody has their limit, is what I'm trying to say,
yes.
Joanne. Did you ever feel that you were reaching your limit? And when you did, if you did, how'd you cope with it?
I felt like I reached my limit every day when he lived with me. I'm going to be really honest about that. I mean, it was really stressful.
How was your health? Did you sleep?
I didn't sleep well because he was a falls risk. And so I even had kind of like one of those baby monitors, because especially as he got older and more dementia, he would get up in the middle of the night, to go to the bathroom or something, try to go by himself, which he couldn't, and he could fall. And so you were never getting a good night's sleep because you were kind of always half listening, in case he was going to fall or something, so it was things like that. So, and I did have, a sister who helped me probably about 20% of the time, and a niece that helped me a little bit too. But I'd say, 75% of the time it was on me. And I would be lying if I said when he lived with me, I probably didn't get angry at some point every single day. It's just true. But I did. But that's when I'd go away for a couple of days. My brother lives in Arizona. I'd make him come out for like 2-3 days.
Oh, is that so?
Every
that would help
couple
a
of
lot.
months, and then I'd just go away for 2 days. And if you don't take care of yourself, you can't do it.
That was your own personal respite
that was
care,
my
and
respite.
you had to get away.
Yeah, and he knew like every 6 to 12 weeks he had to come out for a couple of days, and I'd go away, and he had to take care of Dad, and that's how we managed it. But it was a lot. It was a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. I took a toll on me financially, emotionally, physically, in every way possible, and financially too. It was a hit.
How uniform are the resources we have for caregivers? As far as the area agencies on aging are concerned, are the resources the same statewide? Do you have access to the same resources, I think is what I'm trying to ask?
You have access to the same services at area agencies on aging, like the caregiver support program. Some communities, they have a support group for caregivers. Some have not built that group yet. So you will find nuances as you move through our system, but based on what our system is focused on the community and the community that area agency on aging serves. So not every community in Pennsylvania is the same. So some of this will look a little bit different as you move from area agency on agency to what programs they offer. But the basics, the family care, the caregiver support program, the options programs, the programs that we have for senior centers or home delivered meals, they are consistent through all of our 52.
Nathan, you haven't been in our program before, so I want to know more about you and your association with the Department of Aging.
Sure. I started 2 years ago as a William and Hannah Penn Fellow, which is basically a program with the Governor's Policy Office, and then I was placed with the Department of Aging. Really, I pursued the fellowship because the project outlined was to develop a multi-sector plan for aging, or MPA, which was something I focused on in my master's study. Was sort of my career dream was to help Pennsylvania write their multi-sector plan for aging, and this sort of the stars aligned on a project. So I applied and was fortunate enough to be selected as the fellow, and then I helped the secretary and the rest of our team work on the Aging Our Way PA, which is now our multi-sector plan for aging, which basically just means a strategic plan to improve aging services and infrastructure over the next 10 years so that we're meeting this raising older adult population.
So what inspired you to get into this line of work anyway?
That would be my experience with caregiving, essentially, and with my grandparents, and providing that level of care, seeing firsthand what...
you were caring for both grandparents, you say?
My mother was the caregiver. I want to make that very clear.
Okay.
I was, supporting in as many ways as I could, but she, was doing the day-to-day, 24-hour sort of supervising, like to Joanne's point, doing the bathing, doing the taking people to or my grandmother to the beauty parlor,
right.
taking, making the meals every day, and which is fortunate, they would never eat a home delivered meal. Only my mother's cooking, but again, each situation is very different. But seeing firsthand sort of how that can affect someone's longevity as an older adult and their experience and quality of life, and what that family caregiver can do to change their life, but also how that affects the caregiver and their families, and how supports need to be sort of delivered to them in a very tailored way.
I like what you said about the beauty parlor, because people like to be fussed over, don't they? That's nice.
And it's nice to feel good and look good, so you can keep enjoying yourself.
No, and that's the thing you forget. It's all those appointments you have to take someone to. It's not just the doctor. It's to get his hair cut. It's to go to PT. It's just it's a full-time job taking people to these appointments. But you're right. The other things too that are important, like taking him to church or getting the hair done. Right. I mean, all those things are really important.
Oh, going to church and staying socialized.
Yeah.
That makes the whole experience more pleasant for everybody, you included.
Well, that was important to him and to me, that he stay socialized. He was very involved with his church, and so I would take him to church every week, or a service during the middle of the week. And I think it was really important for him to get out and still be with other people as much as he could.
Mr. Secretary, are you aware of any new legislation out there that is addressing caregivers and what they might need?
There is talks of some support for grandparents raising grandchildren right now, but it's very really early on in that conversation, so nothing that we can make in any form of announcement. But there's discussions about doing some more in that space, because it's becoming, again, it's a growing population in Pennsylvania of caregivers that we're talking about more and more now.
Mm-hmm. And at the federal level, AARP is really pushing for a caregiving tax credit. It's kind of starting to make its way through, but again, it would give people a tax break, when they file every year if they're a caregiver.
Now, I gave Nathan a chance to talk about himself. Mr. Secretary, in the event our viewers haven't seen you before in this program, why not give him a thumbnail bio on your being Secretary of Aging?
Okay, Jason Kavulich, Secretary of Aging for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I come from Scranton in Lackawanna County, where I worked in the Lackawanna County Human Services Department for well over 20 years, doing, starting in child welfare, but, moving into aging in my latter years as the director of the Area Agency on Aging, and really falling completely in love with that work and the work that I did with the department, and transforming our community and reinserting the Area Agency on Aging as one of the most important, if not the most important, human services agency that we had in the community, because we had such a large population of older adults living in our community, over 60,000. For a small Class 3 county, that was quite a significant number. But also really highlighting again the importance of working together as systems and bringing that conversation to the table about older adults are impacted by behavioral health. Older adults are impacted by child welfare issues, grandparents raising grandchildren. Older adults are impacted by drug and alcohol issues as well. So bringing all of the human services together to focus on what we do for older adults was something I was very passionate about.
Now, every year you have to appear in front of our legislature and talk about the budget, your budget concerns and priorities for your department. What do these lawmakers tend to zero in on that you can readily anticipate and address?
Well, I can say this, that from the General Assembly, everyone is supportive of older adults living in their community, regardless of what side of the aisle they sit on. They care about the older adults in their community. They support the work for the older adults in their community. It's never an easy decision on how to distribute resources. I don't envy anyone, and in the circumstances where we have to at the department distribute resources, like our senior center grants, it's painstaking because there is such need, and the demand is constant. But I said one thing that they're always concerned about is making sure that people have the resources to live in the community the way they choose to live. People are focused in on that. Do they have the prescription support? Do they have the in-home support that they need? Is there a program that helps with home modifications, that puts in the bath bars and helps get ramps installed? They're all important conversations that the legislature wants to have. Are we doing enough to protect older adults in the communities from scams and being victimized? Are we doing enough to make sure that our caregivers that become stressed have the resources that they need so that they don't cross a threshold and their stress and their anger gets the better of them someday. So they're focused correctly in making sure that we have what we need to keep older adults in the community supported the way the older adult is choosing that they want to be supported, and making sure that they can live in the community of their choice.
How about you, Joanne? Tell us more about your relationship with the AARP.
So I'm state president emeritus now. I was for 6 years state president. And then before that, I was the regional director of the United States Department of Health and Human Services appointed by President Obama. And then before that, Deputy Secretary of Health for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania under Governor Rendell. So before that, also worked in public health at our foreign aid agency. So more than 30 years as a public health official. And that's really been my focus of my career is public health and keeping people healthy.
So while you were president of AARP for 6 years, what were some of the bigger issues that came up?
Well, this is one of them, caregiving. It's not just for me.
When did you step down as president?
2 years ago.
Relatively recent.
Yeah, relatively recently. Yeah, this is one of the issues. The Secretary mentioned another one, fraud. We really care about that issue. There's so much elder fraud out there. It's really heartbreaking, the billions of dollars that are lost every year. And of course, keeping solvent and strengthening Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, those are really kind of the 5 top priorities for us at AARP.
And as far as your personal experience is concerned, Joanne, there's no doubt there are people out there listening to your story with much interest. What kind of advice could you give them? Again, given the benefit of your experience, what do you want them to know right now?
Well, I think one of the things I mentioned before, I really do think it's important to have these conversations with your parents when they're younger. Again, I've told you, we've been having those conversations now with our family members in our 60s. People really wait too long, I think, to have these conversations.
Have the conversation when everybody's healthy.
When everybody's healthy, and with everybody in the room. One of the things we didn't talk about in my situation, there was no kind of sibling tension because we all had honest conversations beforehand. My siblings were clear that they would not take in my parents, and that wasn't within any animosity. It was just kind of factual, that wasn't something they were going to be willing to do. And so so we all got to have that decision in a calm manner, in an educated manner, in a thoughtful manner. So I can't express enough how important I think it is to do these early, because then you do avoid some of those tensions and animosity and arguments and resentments that come up later. So that's my number one. And to educate yourself. I mean, really, this care kit, and even the AARP resources, it's so important to look at this stuff ahead of time, because again, between managing people's medical appointments and medical conditions and the financial implications and the legal implications and the medical implications and even home alterations and whatever, it is so much. And you just can't take it in if you're waiting till the last minute when you're in crisis mode. So you really should be looking at this stuff, early, when in a way when it's not needed. I think that's really my best advice that I can give people.
Now, a few minutes ago, we were talking about lawmakers. Now, I mean elected officials. These are people who come and go, of course. And what can Pennsylvanians do to help these lawmakers make better policy that would benefit caregivers? How about you, Nathan?
I think making your voice heard is always very important. We have our Pennsylvania Council on Aging that includes people with lived experience as older adults, as caregivers, et cetera. Always participating. There's always room for participation, I think, at the state or regional level. Defer to the secretary.
I think making sure your voice is heard is the most important thing. I saw recently one of our state representatives said, it's so much more important to me to hear from an individual about their experience, to have a conversation with them, than to receive a form letter in the mail that everybody signed off on. And there's value to both, yes, but he is highlighting for us all that individual conversation, the stories that the three of us can share with that person, would have a greater impact than all of us sending the very same letter to that person. You might have 3 letters, but that one conversation would outweigh it because of the personal experience, because of the way you can relate that conversation back to the individual. So advocating, making sure you speak to your legislator, making sure that they know your opinion, making sure that they hear your voice is incredibly important. Getting out to vote and exercising your vote is another important thing that people have to take advantage of. We're fortunate to live in a system that we do, and making sure that we exercise our ability to get out there and do our civic duty is something that everyone should take seriously. Everyone should make sure that they're in a position of knowledge and make the informed choice that they want at the polls.
Now, this next question, I think any of you could comment on. People like it when they have a purpose. So what's the feeling you can get when you've had this satisfying relationship, caring for another person?
I think I can start. I think that when you get to see sort of the forest of the trees of the day-to-day mayhem of I have to do this and then this and I'm exhausted and I haven't slept and I need to make dinner, and then you actually get to the point where you're seeing that you've improved the quality of life of a person you really care for, or that you've stepped up and you've done this duty, is really the reward. In some cases, people might have stronger bonds with their family members, with their siblings, with their spouses, with their children. I think that was the experience I had. But I think everyone's situation is a little different of how that reward comes.
And the relationship can take on a new dimension, can it?
Well, yeah. I mean, in some ways, you become the parent then, right?
Exactly.
To your parent, right? And so the relationship kind of flips in a way. But yet at the same time, for me, it was still my father. So I still kind of deferred to him on something. So it became this kind of weird dynamic.
Sounds like a give and take.
Yeah.
He still has to have some agency over what happens to him.
Right.
And that's what the secretary was getting at.
Yeah, no, right, absolutely agree. But it was a weird dynamic in a way, because in some ways you become the parent now, and yet on the other hand, he is still your father, and so, right, you wanted to defer to him at times. So it was a weird dynamic, but we managed it.
And how about you, Mr. Secretary? I know earlier in your career you had a lot of face-to-face contact.
Well, I think about, as we're sitting here talking about, all the conversations that I had sitting in the chair as a AAA director, and people calling and saying, I want this for my parents, but my parents are saying no. And the frustration in their voice, because they were trying to do right by their parents. Right. But their parents weren't there. They weren't in agreement. And thinking about siblings and the conversations calling, well, my sister wants to do it this way. All of those struggles that people are having out there.
What could you possibly do to resolve this struggle? Did you even try?
Oh well, you talk to people. Then that's the beauty of what we do. Nathan talked about the reward of what we do. Mm-hmm. I subscribe to this school of servant leadership. The reward that we get for the work that we do, when you help someone work through that, or you help a family who's struggling with the family dynamic, that is why we do what we do, to make sure that we're supporting our older adults, our older adult population, our older adult communities, to make sure that people can live how they want with independence and dignity and respect, but also that we can help families work through some really challenging times. Instead of, having your bond with your siblings broken forever, that we can help. We make sure we talk you through that. We work with you to make sure that at the end of the day, while stressful decisions have been made, while your parents may not agree with what you see as a plan and they're going to do their own thing, that we don't see the family completely break apart. That we see that family stay together, communicate together, and see those older adults still live and thrive in their community.
We only have 2 minutes left in our show, so let's consider some very important tips for our viewers as far as programs and getting in contact. If there's a caregiver out there and they feel they don't know what to do, they just don't know what the first step is to take, Mrs. Secretary, tell them briefly what they should do.
What I think they should do is they should go online and take a look at our PA Care Kit. And that will help you start to wrap your mind about what you need to do next. And that may take you to the AARP website, that may take you to our Area Agency on Aging, that may take you down a whole different path, but it'll take you somewhere to get the support that you need to take that next step as a caregiver.
Our guests have been Joanne Grossi, Executive Council President Emeritus at the AARP of Pennsylvania, Nathan Lampenfeld, Special Assistant to the State Secretary of Aging, and the Secretary of Aging himself, Jason Kavulich. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for Focus on Aging Adults. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.
Focus on Aging Adults is sponsored in part by AARP.